Welcome to Just Relationships, the show that offers you concrete ways to make your relationships better. Whether it's your boss, your spouse, your children, or your friends, the quality of your relationships in life directly affects how you feel about yourself and the success you achieve. Your host, Dr. Duffy Spencer, a psychotherapist, telecoach, author, and seminar leader, will interview top experts to help you learn to manage this essential part of your life. And now, here's your host, Dr. Duffy Spencer.
Oh, trauma. We hear about this word constantly these days, trauma. And then you add drama to trauma, drama. And it seems like we're in this cauldron of trauma, drama. Well, today we're going to shed some light on this very sad subject, something that happens to people and something that we all can do something about. I am very pleased to introduce to you my guest, Dr. Kelly Bonhoff, who is the author of Beyond Trauma, Drama, Cultivating the Sacred Nature of Families to Heal. Wow, I'm going to say that again. Beyond Trauma, Drama, Cultivating the Sacred Nature of Families to Heal. Welcome, Dr. Kelly Bonhoff.
Thank you, Dr. Duffy. It's such an honor to be here.
For me too, Dr. Kelly. So you have a very interesting background, and as a result, you have a different take on trauma and how it impacts families and what on earth families can do to heal. Can you tell us about your extensive background in this?
Well, I have spent as a registered nurse and a trauma therapist the last 35 years with countless generations of traumatized families while navigating my own journey of abuse and trafficking in childhood. And through those experiences, I've had this very interesting journey to answer one question in this lifetime, which is, why are children being hurt by those who are meant to love them and keep them safe? Now, little did I know that that journey would result in a spiritual awakening last March that allowed me the opportunity to gain insight through intuition and visions and dreams related to a new way of seeing families who are suffering in our world, regardless of who they are, where they live, what they've been through. And had I not experienced it personally, looked for the answers professionally through the lens of nursing and through the lens of marriage and family therapy counseling, had I not had the honor of co-founding Josephine's Clinic, which is a nonprofit for those who have experienced trafficking and violence in their lifetimes, all of this information would not have come together in this way. And what I want to say about it is, first of all, our families are stronger, more courageous, and more resilient than they can imagine. So the first belief that I would like to move to the side is that traumatized families are too hurt to heal. That is a myth. And if there's anything I know now that I understand it, is that the trauma that families have been experiencing actually began from the very first ancestors' time. In other words, trauma has always been with us. It's interwoven within the tapestry of humanity itself, really helping us thread together our greatest gifts and our deepest suffering. So trauma is an experience that happens to anyone that causes a shock to our mental, emotional, physical, or spiritual well-being. And what I understand that has happened is we are echoing through our evolution as human beings, these generational patterns. Now, the good news is that once we understand what's going on and we can see the pattern in our families, then we have an opportunity. So I believe the trauma drama is actually drama being the dynamic replay of adversity, manifesting anguish. So the drama is the pattern, but trauma drama, I believe, is a human stress response. I believe it's something that humanity is addicted to, that it doesn't realize that it has an addiction to drama itself. In other words, if you think of human beings as one sacred family, I believe that what has happened is we have gotten so conditioned to the drama that we need it in order to survive. And so I talk about this in the perspective of the merry-go-round of survival. And what I noticed in my own life, whether you're an individual, a couple, a family, a community, a society, humanity itself, I believe we are all on, or most of us have been experiencing this merry-go-round effect. And once we recognize that we're on that merry-go-round, we can then make different choices about how we would like to think about ourselves, the things we say to ourselves and others, the feelings that come up when we're living in the past or being anxious about the future.
Dr. Kelly Bonhoff, there's so much wonderful things you're saying. Well, let's put it this way, saying important things about sad events.
Right.
And you've given us so many gems already. First of all, you're talking about trafficking, human trafficking.
Yes.
And you're talking about children. It's usually children and women that are the most victimized. And did you say you have a personal background in that?
I do.
You do. You were trafficked as a child?
Yes.
Oh, my word, Dr. Kelly Bonhoff. Wow. From victim to victor, right? From victim to victor. And I certainly want to ask you about that. Mm-hmm. And I'm just looking at your perennial question. How is it possible that adults who are supposed to love and protect their children actually hurt them? How on earth does that happen? And talking about families are stronger than they realize they are, which yes. I totally agree. And I talk to families and couples about that all the time as a psychotherapist. And exposing the myth that we are too hurt to heal. So it sometimes seems that way. The hurt is so deep. And as you talk about, that trauma puts us into a state of shock on every single level where the brain actually cannot process. And we live in a society that doesn't allow for a forum for verbal expression, for taking the time to look at our feelings, express our feelings, sit in our feelings, be heard in our feelings. We live, in my view, in a feeling-phobic society where we're afraid of feelings, and we think the best way to handle them is to deny them, which couldn't be further from the truth. And so you talk about patterns echoing over generations, and then addiction to drama. Addiction to drama.
Yes.
And that do we actually need drama to survive, or do we think we need drama to survive? So I've stopped you and reiterated about 5 key points. So I'm going to let you go again, and then I'll interrupt you again.
Well, there is a lot going on. And so one of the things that has also been very interesting in these aha moments for me is that trauma, when it occurs very young, so it can occur at conception. In other words, if there is a distress or some stress in the conception process, if mothers, in my case as well, my mother was very stressed during the time I was in prenatal growth before I was born. I came into an environment that was stressed. But the key thing that I learned, though, is that the initial trauma injury actually caused the imbalance between our human nature, which is our ego and our psyche and our feelings, and our sacred nature. So I believe that the mind, the body, and spirit were thrown into an imbalance at that initial trauma, wherever that occurred for anyone. And that can occur when you're in your 40s. That can occur for the first time. It doesn't have to happen in childhood. But any injury that throws you more into your human nature, which are those thoughts and feelings and behaviors, the mindset of, that you have been touched by trauma drama in your life if you feel unlovable, unworthy, or not enough. This is the key injury, traumatic injury that preceded what I call trauma drama, or the human stress response to the imbalance between our human and sacred natures. Sacred meaning our soul and spirit, or whatever you choose to call that. So that's the injury that the world is actually processing right now, trying to get its bearings and integrate our mind, our body, and our spirit. And because for millennia, this imbalance has occurred because of societal and cultural and familial and personal stress, when we are not in concert with our sacred nature, which is our true nature, our power, our authentic power, that's when we see the disease, the physical and mental illnesses, the violence, the hurting of others or ourselves. I've taken care of many children that have hurt themselves.
Yes.
So that's the injury I'm speaking of, that it's the microcosm. So if you look at just my own life, and then I look to see what's happened in my own marriage, what's happened with my own family generations, what's happened in the community I live in society. So we're all one family. And what the world is experiencing right now is the overwhelm, the overburden, the overscheduled. So when we hit the pandemic pause, it allowed everyone to get into something I call the stop, drop, and be, which is stopping in the moment, being in the breath, breathing, drop into your breath, and then being in that moment. And everybody went, what is happening here? And that happened to me as well as an essential worker. I hit that wall so hard after 35 years that something had to give in my own being. And that's the integration between my human nature and my sacred nature. Once they started to have a conversation, once I allowed myself to rest and to restore and to imagine and to dream, then all of what I had experienced and saw in the world began to become much more clear. And the trauma, just like in any addiction, is only there to help us cope with survival. We are in a survival merry-go-round. That's what is happening. And once we begin to transform that merry-go-round from survival to what I call spirit or sovereignty, then we're going to be able to embrace our own authentic power. We won't be as confused about what the messages are in the world. We will not have any confusion about what's truth for us. And we will be able to navigate the healing of generations of our families. And that's a big statement for me to make. And the only reason that I can honestly say it is because I've spent this time traveling to the generations of my own family and have begun the healing process. And some of us have been willing to look at this harder, more dense, darker parts of the themes of our family, which are abuse, alcoholism, violence, sexual issues, assaults, trafficking, And I just wanted the opportunity to let people know that we are, as a humanity, making a beautiful turn actually toward, rather than this idea of considering ourselves broken, we are becoming the greatest expression of love that we have ever known, individually, familially, as couples, and as a world. The turn is happening, families are healing, and even though we may not be hearing about that through the media or television or whatever we may be listening to, I just wanted to let people know we are healing.
Wow. What a fascinating perspective, Dr. Kelly Bonhoff, author of Beyond Trauma Drama, Cultivating the Sacred Nature of Families to Heal. So, Dr. Kelly, we're looking at through history, families have been distressed. Trauma has been the norm.
Yes.
And obviously we're unconscious about this. We pass it on to the next generation. So we have intergenerational trauma. And you talk about the initial trauma. I'm just for the sake of our audience and clarity, very simply, I think of trauma in two two major categories. There is the catastrophic trauma that you read about in newspaper headlines when there's an accident, murder, massacre, disgusting things. And then there is developmental trauma, yes, which is the history of small t's. When a child is slighted, they're neglected, they're told that they're not supposed to have feelings or their feelings are wrong. They're harshly treated. And so that's when I think about developmental trauma, and you're saying so much of the input is the very initial trauma, even in utero, which we are aware of. When the mother is distressed, there are certain hormones that are secreted, and there is the baby, the embryo, the uterus, the embryo. What's the other term? My God, I can't believe the other term for being in utero, distressed, and that becomes the norm even before the child is born.
Yes.
So how, in this merry-go-round of survival, awareness of our sacred nature, and you have witnessed families healing. You yourself have obviously healed. And so what is that? How do you bring people to that kind of awareness so we can be enlightened in this new age? I very much appreciate your optimistic perspective on all of this.
Yes. And so one of the key parts of this for me goes to the family of origin, our origin story. So human beings have three important things in common, I think. We have a mom, we have a dad, whether we know them or not, have been raised with them or not. And we also have a story, an origin story. And that story is very important to how we perceive ourselves. Because I got to tell you, I did not stop loving my parents. I stopped loving myself. I lost a sense of self very early. So the only input I had about self was from others. So the beliefs that I had, the feelings, the words that I said, the language I used, and then the actions I took to stay safe as the oldest of four children. I had three important things to do. The one was to keep my mother healthy. The first was to keep my siblings safe. And the third was to keep my father happy. So when you come through in a parentified role, your sense of self is set very early. So when I speak about this initial healing process that I believe will echo harmonization rather than traumatization into the world, I believe we begin with our families of origin, even if we may not know who they are. So what I'd like to do is just very briefly talk about the merry-go-round of survival, which is the patterns. It's 7 characteristics. The very first thing that I notice is that families that are traumatized significantly, and that's up to them to determine what is significant, is secrets. Families keep secrets, and we keep secrets from ourselves as well. And that's the big denial. Don't even notice I am lying to myself. After secrets, we have silence. We stay quiet about those secrets. And those secrets can occur in early childhood, but secrets occurred along my timeline. As a young woman, before I got married, after I got married, I have 2 grown children. So secrets occur, and silence about those secrets are happening in real time. The third most significant injury or pattern here is shame. So when we do not feel lovable or worthy and we carry shame that is complex and compounding, then to me, those first 3 characteristics of secrets, silence, and shame, all the hallmarks of whether or not you're on a merry-go-round of survival. The next thing I noticed are these shadows. These are those parts of ourselves that are talked about quite a bit, the inner child parts where we feel angry and jealous and guilty and we blame and we just whatever all that is. And those are the things we press down and we keep hidden. The next thing we find is the status quo. And this is what I'm noticing in the world right now is that, coming out of the pandemic, the people want to keep things the same. Change is very scary, and the unknown is very scary. So status quo is a key component of the survival merry-go-round. Then we have sabotage, which is something we see within ourselves and our families when we're doing well, someone's doing well, the marriage is doing well. And then something sneaks in to kind of take us back almost to the beginning. And so I noticed that. And then the last S, so there's 7 characteristics, is the suffering itself. And how I just asked the question about that is, do you feel a deep hurt mentally, emotionally, physically in your body, and or spiritually? So that injury that occurred whenever it did, whatever that experience was, that imbalanced our human and sacred nature or their inability to integrate from the time we were conceived or nurtured in the womb or born. That's where the suffering is coming from. It's that imbalance. It's just not being able to wrap our human nature, not able to wrap its arms around the sacred nature. And the only reason for that is because that ego part of ourself that we've identified with as who we are is very afraid. It's afraid of its own death. And the way I was able to, in a fun way, help the ego mind, that part to slow down, calm down, the first thing I did was I wrote it a letter and I gave it a paid vacation indefinitely. Ah! The second thing I did was I visualized my sacred nature throwing its light or arms around it and saying, "You have done an incredible job keeping me alive. And you do not have that job description anymore. I will take it from here." And so walking toward our ego, rather than shaming the ego or judging the ego or blaming the ego or whatever some of that is, I believe when we walk toward it, thank it, appreciate it, have gratitude for it and for what it's been able to help us do, then the ego says, "Oh, unpaid vacation indefinitely? I could use a nap. I could use a minute to rest." And so I just approach that from a very different way.
Did you say I could use a nest?
I just want to take a nap. So I visualize the nap in a hammock with an umbrella drink in front of the waves and just allowing the ego to rest. My goodness. I mean, it's so busy. It's so busy. So
Yeah. I love, Dr. Kelly, how you have integrated the inner child with the shadow and the unhealthy ego. That's the first comment. And the second is in slightly different language. This is how I work with my patients as well, because most of us want to expunge those parts that get in our way. And in internal family systems, I don't know if you're aware of that, internal family systems, we look at parts, we embrace all parts, and we show gratitude for parts, and we release them into their naturally healthy roles from our higher self, from our self with a capital S. Right. And so we reparent from the higher self, and we free up those protector parts that are very, very young and immature, that were born at the same time the trauma occurred, and around the same time. And these are the patterns that we're aware of. And when two people are fighting, it's their protector parts that are fighting. And meanwhile, the inner child is being neglected. The protector parts are trying to protect the inner child, the wounds, but yet they're being neglected, really, when we're arguing, when our protector parts are arguing. So slightly different language, but the same theme. And for everyone, I know you are absolutely fascinated by this discussion, as I am. And unfortunately, we have to close. And that's why I invited Dr. Kelly Bonhoff, author of Trauma, Cultivating the Sacred Nature of Families to Heal. I invited her for 2 shows so that we have a 2-part series. So if you will please come back next week for part 2 of Dr. Kelly Bonhoff and Beyond Trauma Drama. Meanwhile, Dr. Kelly, is there anything you'd like to leave us with until next week?
What I'd like to say is to remember that you are whole, safe, and loved just as you are.
I'm going to repeat, you are whole, safe, and loved just as you are. Again, thank you, Dr. Kelly Bonhoff, author of Beyond Trauma Drama, Cultivating the Sacred Nature of Families to Heal. And that's Bohnhoff, Bohnhoff, Bohn, Bonhoff, Hoff. Thank you, Dr. Kelly.
Thank you,
so
Dr.
looking
Duffy.
forward to our next show. And to all of you, wishing you great relationships.